Congress back in session, all eyes on the budget process. Budget, remember those? Wow, no continuing resolution, no omnibus spending. You know that we're actually trying to get a budget going here. But we do have that debt ceiling thing looming. So what's going to happen? What gets cut? How do we move forward? Let's check in with one of the movers and players in this entire discussion, Congressman from the 5th Congressional District in the great Commonwealth of Virginia. He's Congressman Bob Good. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
First, let's sort of lay the predicate here in terms of why this is so important. I feel like in this town, when they talk about, debt ceilings and debt and deficit, those numbers aren't real. The numbers are astounding. And the amount of money we're paying just in interest is bigger than most third world nations and even some second world nations' overall budgets. How bad is it right now?
You're exactly right. It's astounding when you look at it. It's almost unbelievable the damage that we've done. When you have $32 trillion in national debt, which equates to nearly $100,000 per citizen, I think most Americans would probably argue they haven't gotten a lot for their $100,000 share. But we're going to be paying some $800 billion in interest in the next year, which doesn't get us anything except to service the debt that we have because the explosion in interest rates, which, by the way, are misguided amongst themselves. Typically, as you know, you raise interest rates to combat a hot economy to try to ward off inflation. In this case, we caused the inflation with the reckless spending, the unprecedented spending, $10 trillion in new spending in the first 2 years of administration. Has never happened before. And then we make things worse for the American people by raising interest rates, which have priced people out of mortgages and so forth. But $32 trillion national debt, it's going to continue to explode. We've got a projected somewhere around a $1.5 trillion deficit just this year. We've got to take real action, and we intend to do so.
And sir, one of the reasons why we like you is that you can sort of speak plainly about these issues and make it matter to the American taxpayer. I don't think people quite understand that all of this spending, all of the deficit spending, all of the interest that we're paying, it's directly related to people's concerns over inflation. If they want to fix inflation, they got to start here, right?
Yes, the inflation has absolutely been caused by this president's policies. You know, inflation was non-existent at about 1% before he came into office. Now we're seeing inflation we haven't seen since Jimmy Carter. This is a president that makes him look competent, makes Obama look moderate. Who would have thought either one of those were possible? But it's been directly caused by government spending. And then you got the Inflation Increase Act that we passed to make it even worse, then the omnibus spending bill to make it even worse. And so Republicans were given the majority by the American people. We intend to exercise the responsibility we have constitutionally to protect the financial integrity of the United States.
Yeah, and let's be clear because, this is sadly a bit of a bipartisan problem in that huge amounts of spending was done during COVID-19. I think President Trump was lied to. I think members of Congress were lied to about that virus, and that needs to be worked out. But there was a lot of emergency spending to bail out American people who wanted to work, who could have worked, but they were told not to go to work. The problem, Congressman Good, is that new spending during 2020, during the pandemic, became the new baseline. We've never actually gone back.
You're exactly right. What we've got to do is reset the baseline and begin to go back we need to go back to 2019 pre-COVID spending on discretionary non-defense spending. Overall spending was, I'll say only, that's really silly to put in front of trillions, but only 4.4 trillion pre-COVID. And now we've had revenue the last 2 years, record revenue as a result of the Trump tax cuts. Democrats will lie and say that we've got deficits because of the Trump tax cuts. Not true, of course. We've got 4.9 trillion in revenue coming in the last 2 years, which means you only have to go back pre-COVID where we'd be running $500 billion surplus, which we could be using to pay down the national debt if we just went back to pre-COVID spending.
And if I may add to that, that's increased revenue to the federal government with the Trump tax cuts, and that's with a moribund, stagnant economy. Imagine if the economy was soaring the way it was before the pandemic.
Imagine if we had pro-growth policies like we had in place from 16 to 20 under the Trump presidency.
That said, of course, the mainstream media, they're reporting on some of the rumored budget moves by the Republicans in the House as drastic cuts to education, drastic cuts to housing, drastic cuts to health and human services. I've read into some of these stories here. $150 billion in what can only be described as extreme left-wing political woke policies. There's things that this government is spending on right now that are absolutely contrary to basic fundamental understandings of what our country was founded on. This is like Ibram X. Kendi has written our budget with all of the crazy woke policies. Can you give us an example of some of the things that you guys would like to cut? It is actually not only costing money that we don't have, but it's actually divisive policy.
There's no question. There's hundreds of $billions on extreme climate, environmentalism, energy extremist policies, green raw deal policies that were part of the $1.7 trillion $1.7 trillion omnibus spending bill, along with the Inflation Increase Act, which was really the Green Raw Deal put in place. We've got to claw back some of that spending, and some of that spending. In addition, you've just got trillions of dollars that are for diversity, equity, and inclusion policies in our military, throughout our education system, and otherwise. We need to defund all of that. The American people have given us the majority to make change. We've got to rescind the $400 billion slated for the Biden's loan transfer scheme, the student loan transfer scheme, where he wants to transfer the responsibility from those who borrowed the money to those, the taxpayers who did not. That's $400 billion. Of course, that's coming before the Supreme Court, but that's money slated to be spent for that, and we need to end that as well. There's many other examples that we could give that we've got to, even cutting back discretionary non-defense spending to 22 levels would get us $150 billion.
Yeah. If I could touch on defense spending, though, I mean, there's two prongs of it that I think do need some attention. The first is certainly building back our Navy to the level that President Trump had promised, to make sure that we have the full complement, because we keep hearing from China right now that they are cranking out ships and submarines at a record pace. And I know as a Virginia congressman, that's an important issue for you, sir. So, do we have renewed commitment to make sure that the United States Navy is equipped to deal with our challenges in the Pacific?
Well, the agreement that we made back during the speaker battle was to go to, at a minimum, 2022 spending levels, to have a reset back to the baseline of 2022 rather. We can do that, though, by going to 2019 on the discretionary non-defense, and then keep defense at the 2024 level that's been projected, if you will, so that we put a priority on homeland security and national defense. And we need to break the parity and separate the parity that's existed for how many years, where the Dems and the Republicans have traded off, where the Dems would agree to increases in defense spending in return for the Republicans agreeing to non-defense discretionary spending, growing the welfare state, growing the 1,200 unauthorized programs that continue to be funded, by the way. We ought not to be funding any of that. But that said, with $900 trillion defense budget, it shouldn't be a sacred cow in the sense that it's not accountable for how the taxpayer dollars are spent. And that said, like I said, I'm from Virginia, but the defense spending can't be based on whose district it's in, providing jobs for the defense industry, or projects for somebody's particular district. It's got to be about a lethal fighting machine so that nobody on earth wants to challenge us. But right now, we're spending the equivalent of the next 9 nations combined from a defense standpoint. So we need to hold accountable our defense spending and look for areas where we can, of course, eliminate the climate extremism the Biden regime has brought into the defense spending, the diversity, equity, inclusion that's weakening our military, but also look for efficiencies. And where the Defense Department has failed every audit that's ever been held for it, and they don't think they can have any cuts in defense where we've got redundancies or inefficiencies or outdated things. So it needs to be accountable to.
And one last question on defense. Every single bill that's put forth before Congress so far for increased spending in Ukraine has been tagged with something else, either the omnibus spending bill or cynically hurricane relief in Florida that had Ukraine spending attached to it. If the president wants more spending for Ukraine, will the House majority of Republicans demand that it be a standalone bill with a standalone vote?
Yes, I think so. But I will tell you that that's some of the reforms that we put in place for this new Congress that came out of the speaker battle, was to change how Congress operates, single issue bills where you can't have the omnibus spending bills. Things need to stand on their own merit. We're allowing amendments from the floor. We're working through regular order, committees of jurisdiction, and also single issue legislation, a minimum amount of time to read legislation before we actually vote on it, those kinds of things to protect us from that. Ukraine funding needs to stand on its own merits. We spent $113 billion last year, $260 million per congressional district. That needs to be justified on its own, apart from any other non-related spending.
Look at us. We're making budgeting and spending and ways and means and regular order cool again. Like that. More to come on O'Connor Tonight.